In this video, we're going to talk about how to move objects in ZBrush using Transpose. And there's two methods of Transpose. That's Transpose Gizmo and the Transpose line. And we're also going to talk about how to pose characters using Transpose and TransposeMaster plugin. So on screen right now, I've got the COVID Demoni model, which consists of multiple subtools organized into folders. And how do we move these individual subtools? If you try to select the bone halo, for example, and then take the move brush, if I use the move brush, it's just going to move the individual polygons in relation to one another. If I turn my draw size all the way up, I can move it like this, but it still doesn't give me that much control. How do we move Z-tools in relation to one another? Well, that's Transpose. So if I press the W key, you'll get this gizmo here, which would look familiar to anyone who's been in another 3D program. So the gizmo has a toolbar along the top and then the XYZ coordinate system for moving, the boxes are for scaling, and the rings are for rotating. Now, if it's sitting off center, you could unlock it with the little lock button here and then click the reset button, and that'll reset it to the actual system coordinates. So if we snap to a front view here, you can see that's the front of this actual figure. I had it set a little bit off center so we could be looking straight down the face at him. So if I click and drag, nothing's happening. That's because I have this still unlocked. So let's go back to where it was. We can undo that, lock it, and now I can move that subtool. I can move it XY, up and down. I can scale it. I can rotate it. Now, if I hold down the Shift key while I rotate, I can snap to increments, and you see those increments reading out at the bottom of the gizmo here. If I want to rotate around my current view, I use this outer circle. Now, if I want, let's undo this so it goes back to its original position. There we go. If I want to move the gizmo, hold down the Alt key and then click on one of the outermost corners there, and I can move its position. So if I bring it down here, let go, and then rotate, I'm rotating around this point. If I want to reset my pivot, I can click Go to Unmasked Mesh Center, and that places it to the unmasked center of the mesh. Now, if you have X symmetry turned on, it's going to go to the unmasked symmetrical center. So for example, here, if I had X symmetry turned on, go to W, go to unmasked mesh center, you see it snaps to the center of 1/2, which can sometimes be useful. Let's focus in on this so we can see it a bit better. Now, if I click the Home button, it's going to snap the entire object to the origin. If I undo that, unlock the gizmo, and then click Home, it puts just the pivot at the origin. So if you lock this, it's locking the gizmo to the object. If you unlock it, it's keeping it unlocked from the object, so I can move the pivot around. So let's go ahead and lock it again. I am going to hide everything but the halo and the head so we can see things a little bit easier. A quick way to do that is to shift-click on the eyeball icon, and that hides everything else. And then I'll go to the body, and I will just turn on visibility on the body. Now let's press F for focus, and we can zoom back in on the head. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, click the corner so I can drag the gizmo out here, and notice my X symmetry is on. So along the top bar, we have the Customize gear. This brings us into our ability to select primitives and deformers. We actually talk about that in a separate video. This is mainly focused on Transpose Gizmo as a method of moving things around. We can use sticky mode. This will pin the position of the gizmo so it snaps back to its original position every time I use it. That's pretty useful if you're trying to rotate something maybe in increments. You can use the pin or the sticky mode to do that. We've already seen go to Unmasked Mesh Center, and we've seen Home, And then we've seen reset, but we'll take a look at it again. If I turn off X symmetry, and if I hold down the Alt key and I make changes to the gizmo, it's not affecting the object, it's just affecting the gizmo. And if I want to reset this to its original positioning, I press the reset button. But watch what happens. It resets the entire object. So if I undo that, if I want to just reset the gizmo, I need to unlock it, then reset the gizmo and lock it again. Now, what if I want to move multiple Z-tools at a time? Let's say, for example, I want to show everything again. I'll just shift-click on the eyeball next to my currently active subtool, and that shows everything. What if I want to change the gizmo, or want to change the position of the halo and this collar? What I'll do is I will go to Unmasked Mesh Center, reset my gizmo, and then I'm going to press the pizza box icon here. Paul from Pixelogic calls this a pizza box icon, and I think it's a really great analogy. It looks like a stack of pizza boxes. What this is it transpose all selected subtools. So everything that is currently not sort of grayed out like this with these sort of horizontal lines, these things will move together if I click and drag. So you see I can move just this subtool. If I undo that, if I Control-Shift-Click on the background and drag, I can select everything. So that's moving all of my subtools at one time. So typically we're only moving a single subtool at once. This allows me to move everything. Now let's say I don't want to move everything. Maybe I only want to move a couple of things. I'll Control-Shift-Click on the background to deselect all. Then I'll Control-Shift-Click on what I want to move. So I'm going to Control-Shift-Click on the halo, Control-Shift-Click on the collar. Now I can move just those two subtools. I can rotate them, and I can scale them. I can go to Unmasked Mesh Center. So if I move this, go to Unmasked Mesh Center. Now, if I want to drop out of this transpose mode, I just turn off Transpose All Subtools, and it will only move a single one. So be aware that that will stay on if you leave it on, and then exit out into a different brush and start sculpting, and then come back to transpose, it will be still turned on. Now the hotkey for transpose is W. W, E, or R. That's move, scale, or rotate. Now any one of those is going to bring up the transpose gizmo, and the transpose gizmo can do any of them, scaling, moving, and rotating. There's a couple other interesting behaviors that I want to point out for this particular tool. If we're on a Z tool that does not have subdivision levels. So this halo actually has some subdivision levels, so I'm going to delete higher. If I were to hold down the Control key, click and drag, I can duplicate this object using transpose, and it automatically masks the original and leaves the new one unmasked. And that's still within a single subtool. That's not making a new subtool, it's just the same subtool, it's just duplicating. Now this can be really useful if you do things like this. Like let's say, for example, I wanted to duplicate this multiple times at the same distance. If I hold down the Control key, click and drag, bring this the distance that I want it to go, like maybe to about here, then let go of Control, I can continue that duplication just like that. So I can make a whole line of these, clear the mask, and that's all a single subtool filled with those duplicates. Control Z will undo that. Now that's something that's really nice about transpose that I like quite a lot. Anytime you want to move something in a single axis, just click the axis to move it. If you want to move something in two axes, click the corner where you were clicking with Alt to move the gizmo. And if you don't click Alt, you can move the entire object in two axes like this, X and Y. Now there's some other interesting behaviors here. If we go to the body, select this one, and I'll step down a few subdivision levels. There is a masking functionality in transpose, which is nice. If I hold down the Control key and then click and drag, I can drag a transpose mask based on the underlying topology. It's basically masking based on those edge loops. So that's Control, click and drag, and it will mask based upon that underlying topology. Now, if I click and drag, I can rotate what's unmasked. This can be somewhat useful for posing, but I prefer to pose using the transpose line, which we're going to look at after this. But I could mask down to the elbow here. I could position my pivot about where the elbow actually is, and then I can click and rotate like so. But you notice it's giving me this sort of not the greatest deformation right there. There is a tool inside of the transpose line that allows you to get a much better sort of skinning in your deformations if you're trying to pose. So while you can make minor adjustments like this and you can mask with this, I recommend posing using the transpose line, which we're going to go into in depth in just a moment. So the transpose gizmo is perfect when you need to manipulate the position of objects in relation to one another. If you watched the video on folders, you will know that anytime I have a folder here, like let's say, for example, I go to the lungs folder. Here I have the lung geometry, and I've got these little sockets that are inside there. If I turn off visibility on everything else, just view the lungs and what's in the lungs folder, here you can see what's inside there. Now, if I want to make a transpose group based on this, I can hit the gear icon and do transpose set. And my gizmo is off screen, so if I press F for focus, I should be able to see it again. Let's zoom out. Now, if I can't find it, there it is down there. Now, if you run into this situation and you just can't find your gizmo, Alt-click on the model and it will snap to where you clicked. So here you see I have automatically created a transpose set. It's the pizza box stack is turned on. If I click go to Unmasked Mesh Center, I can center my pivot, and then I am moving these subtools together. Now let's say that I want to add to my transpose set. I want to add, let's say the hip spikes. I'll turn the hip spikes on. Now these, if I want to move them, need to be inside of a folder. So let's go ahead and put the hip spikes inside the folder here with the skeleton. I will turn on visibility on everything inside the skeleton. Now let's say that I want to move these as well as the lungs. So I already have a transpose set for the lungs. I just click the gear icon on the skeleton folder and click transpose add. And that adds all the skeletal elements to the transpose group. So I can move all of these together. That's the gear icon, transpose add. Now let's say I've changed my mind and I don't want to move the skeleton anymore. Transpose sub, that takes it out. Now I'm just moving the lungs again. So that's very, very handy, and it's much easier to move multiple subtools using the transpose gizmo than using the transpose line. The transpose line is the original method of moving subtools in relation to one another in ZBrush. It's also what we tend to use most often for posing figures. So let's leave our transpose gizmo now, and let's take a look at transpose line. So here we have our hellhound figure on screen. This consists of multiple subtools. There's the body, the teeth, the tongue, and I also have a floor plane, which is hidden. I often will put a polygon cube in and use that as a floor plane when I'm posing, just to make sure that I have the feet in contact with the ground and I can create a sense of weight distribution there. We'll see that a bit more in a moment. So if I press W for move, it brings up the gizmo. We've still got the pizza boxes turned on from the previous demonstration, so we'll turn those off and go to Unmasked Mesh Center. I'll unlock the gizmo and reset it, then lock it again. So to recap, if I click and drag, I can move these subtools in relation to one another. If I go to the teeth, go to the Unmasked Mesh Center, I'm moving the teeth. Go to the tongue, I'm moving the tongue. If I turn on the pizza box stack, transpose all selected subtools, I can move everyone at the same time. Now, let's select the body again. If I turn off the gizmo, which is the Y hotkey, I now have this orange line. Now, usually when you first see the transpose line, it's all stacked up on top of itself. So a good rule of thumb with the transpose line is click drag to draw a new line every time you want to use it. So just click somewhere on the model and drag off to the background. The transpose line will stick to what's beneath it. So if you drag and drop on the model, you'll get a diagonal line. It's sticking to the surface. But if I click drag and drop on the background, I get a straight line. Now the transpose line transposes, rotates, and scales subtools in relation to one another as well, just like the transpose gizmo, but it's a little less familiar a tool. So if I click and drag, draw a new transpose line, I'm on move. Move will always use the center circle. So if I click inside the center circle, I can move that subtool. That's just like clicking on the outer bracket of the transpose gizmo. I'm going to step down a couple subdivision levels so it's a little bit more interactive. If I click on the orange circle, not in it, I can move the transpose line around. And this is a little tricky. Oftentimes people will miss this, or they'll accidentally draw a new line. So it takes a bit of practice. So you click on the center circle, you can move the whole line. If I click on the outer circle, I can rotate that line. If I click on the inner circle, I can rotate that line. Now, for move, we always use the center line. If I click and drag in the outer line, I can trim. So this is basically trimming. This is useful with hard surface. If I were to hold down the Alt key and click on the outer circle, I can reverse that trim. Let's undo that. And if I click this circle, I can shear. So I'm deforming the mesh. If I go to scale, the E hotkey, so it's W, E, and R. Scale will scale around the center circle. So if I click, or the inner circle, the first circle, if I click the inner circle, it squashes and stretches. If I click the outer circle, it scales around the opposite end. So this circle will be the center of the scale. If I click this one, that becomes the center of the scale. Click this one, that becomes the center. And you can see there is a X and Y option here. I can snap my transpose line to those views by clicking that. So I can snap to this axis, snap to this axis. Rotate works the same as scale. If I click the outermost circle, I can rotate around the innermost circle, and vice versa. If I click this circle, it rotates around the other. And you'll notice the XYZ snaps to whatever circle I'm going to be manipulating around. If I click in the center circle, I can rotate around that particular axis. Now, that's going to be useful in posing because there's a method that we can use to supinate and pronate limbs, rotating them around their axis with masking. So remember that. The center circle on rotate rotates the object around that axis the line is on. So if I were to change the axis this way and then click that, it's going to rotate around that axis. Now, you can't undo movement in the transpose line. So if I move the transpose line, undo does not change it. You just have to transpose again. You have to draw that line one more time. The transpose line has another interesting thing built into it that I find very, very useful sculpturally. If I draw a transpose line and end it out here on the document window, so it's a straight line, click the circle, and then I drag the endpoint down here to the base of the skull. And then I'll drag this circle, and you see that hatched line on there? If I bring that down to here, so the end point is at the top of the head, you see I've got a units measurement here. That's 0.9902 units. If I go to Preferences, go to my Transpose Units menu and set my calibration to 1, this will be 1 unit. So I can also set my, my unit name here. I can name them. We can just call it heads, for example. So if I want to know the proportions of this monster, I can grab this circle here. You see I'm currently at 1 heads. If I drag this down to the end of the tail, I can say, well, this creature is 8.7 heads tall. Now, for something like this, which is sort of fantastical anatomy, it's somewhat useful, but if you're trying to do something that's more realistic human anatomy, it's very important to know what your proportions are. So if I were to switch over to, for example, the Nick Z base mesh that comes pre-installed with ZBrush, I can do the same thing here. I can do a transpose line from the chin, drop it off the model, bring it back down. That's going to be 1 head measurement. So I'm going to go to Preferences, Transpose Units, set my calibration distance to 1. So that's 1 heads. And then I can do a measurement of the entire body. I'll turn off perspective and then just hold down the Shift key and click drag this circle straight down to the floor plane. And then that gives me 8 heads. That's a great proportion for a natural but still dynamic and sort of heroic feeling figure. 8 heads tall. If I bring this up to the pubic bone, I can measure that. That's 4 heads. That's right on target where we expect the midpoint of the body to be. We can also draw a line like this from the center. If I turn on X symmetry, draw a line from the center out and to about the acromion process of the shoulder. So there we've got 1 head. So the shoulders are 2 heads wide. So 1 head right there. So that's great. And I can also measure the distance from the chin. Now make sure we get a straight line here. Anytime it sort of gets tangled up like this, I just click somewhere else on the model and then redraw my line. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and I can snap this line in increments, and I'm going to bring it down to here, and I want to measure the distance from the chin to the sternum. So there we go. That's half a head, exactly where we want it to be. So great proportions on this model, and we're able to test them and double check them using the transpose line as a caliper or measuring tool, which is really handy to have that as a measuring tool inside of ZBrush. And a lot of people are not aware that that functionality exists. So under Preferences, Transpose Units, you can change the number of ticks along, major and minor, and you can change the calibration value here. So the transpose line, as I said before, was used for moving and scaling and rotating subtools in relation to one another. And you can still do that, but it's the best use of it is for posing our characters. So let's take a look now at how we can do that by posing our Hellhound model. So here we can see an example of our Hellhound in a pose. It's posed asymmetrically, dynamic positioning, and the subtools have been posed along with the body. Now, to do this, we're going to use a combination of tools. We're going to start by looking at using the transpose line for posing and the basic tools you need to understand with that. And then we're going to look at a plugin called TransposeMaster, which will allow us to transpose multiple subtools at a time. Much like the gizmo will move multiple subtools in space in relation to one another, TransposeMaster allows you to pose meshes that have multiple subdivision levels. So here we have our neutrally posed Hellhound. We've stepped down our subdivision levels to level 3. The highest subdivision level is going to be 2 million polygons, which is far too much to transpose. And this is another good reason why I say earlier in these videos that Dynamesh is great for generating volumes and designs, but you always want to have a model with subdivision levels, and it's a very simple process that I illustrate in another chapter, how you can take a Dynamesh and turn it into a subdivision model that has subdivision levels like this, because you cannot take something that's 1 million polygons or more and then pose that or UV map it or work with it efficiently. We really want to be able to move between subdivisions. So stepping down our subdivision levels, we're going to take the transpose line. Now, if you press the W, E, or R key and you have the gizmo instead of the transpose line, all you have to do is press the Y hotkey or just press that button to turn Gizmo 3D off. Now, just like Gizmo, if you control, click, and drag on the mesh, you can mask based on the underlying topology. So here you see I'm masking this arm based on the topology. If I turn on X symmetry and I control, click, and drag, I can mask symmetrically on both sides. So we'll turn that off. I'm just going to do one arm. I'm going to mask down to the elbow, and then I'll get it as close as possible, and then I'll take my brush, hold down the control key, so I'm masking. Make sure that we have the mask pen selected. Mask pen is here, so we can paint our mask on here. Now, with the unmasked area visible, I will go to rotate, and I'm going to click on the elbow and drag down to the wrist to make a new transpose line and then move. And we're able to bend that joint. But notice the deformation is not very good. We're getting this crease here that we definitely don't want. It doesn't look natural at all. Now, this is where transpose line really shines over transpose gizmo for posing. This allows us to use something called bone posing, which is a built-in skinning algorithm in ZBrush's transpose line. I'm going to unmask a little bit more up the arm here. Control-click and feather that mask. So I'm just control-clicking on the mask to feather it, and we'll draw the transpose line again. Snap to a back view or a front view, and I'm just going to move it so the joint is sitting exactly where it would be. Now, instead of rotating from this circle around this circle, I will hold down the Alt key while I'm in rotate mode up here. Hold down the Alt key, click and drag. And this is bone posing. This allows you, let me make sure that I've got everything masked over here. There we go. This allows you to compress what you're bending towards and stretch what you're bending away from. See that? So that is a skinning algorithm built into transpose posing. And it's very, very handy. If you push it very, very far, you'll still get a little crease, but it's minor compared to what you had before. And anytime you're posing, expect that you will need to do some resculpting, because the nature of the body is, as you're moving, you're changing the relationship between the bony landmarks, the proportions, the origin. So holding down the Alt key, we can click and drag and bend that arm. Undo, and we come back to where we were. And clear our mask. I'm going to delete my previous undo history here because I've built up a lot of undo history and I want to be able to easily snap back to the beginning. So I'm going to go to Edit and I'm going to click Delete Older Undo History. So this is going to be our default start for our undo history. Let's do the entire leg. So I will hold down the Control key, click and drag. Now, if I need to work with a lower subdivision level, I can always Shift D to step down my subdivisions. I can go all the way down to level 1, which is very, very simplified. Shouldn't be a problem. Now I can Control, click and drag and mask all the way down to the hip like this. Let's just rotate around and make sure that everything that needs to be masked is masked. If I go back to Control on my paintbrush, I can paint in the mask where required, and I can use my marquee to just quickly mask out areas that need to be masked out. Control Alt will unmask areas. So now I've got that leg unmasked. I'll go to Transpose Rotate, draw a line from the hip to the knee, and then click and drag, and I can move that. Now here, maybe I want that to be a little bit softer, so I can Control click to feather the edge of the mask, and now that transition will not be so strong. So if I stretch this back really, really far, then I'll want to go in there with my move brush and adjust these areas. So I can take my move brush, scooch that up, smooth that back a little bit, and fix that transition. You'll also notice, and this can happen, you have to be careful that you don't have points that you missed on the other side of the model. So if you look right there on the leg, if I move the transpose line here, I'm catching points over there. So that's a good point to go into your paint or your regular sculpting brush, hold down the Control key, and a nice thing to do is go to Mask Lasso, and then you can just lasso out everything there. So you know you don't have anything selected that you don't want selected. So let's go ahead and start posing this character. Let's move to the head. I'll lasso out the head, invert my mask by Control clicking on the background, and I'll click and drag, draw a transpose line from the base of the neck, drop it on the background so I get a straight line. Let's bring that to the center of the head. Now watch what happens if I rotate the head. It's leaving the teeth and tongue behind. So this is not going to do. Very rarely do we have a character that's just a single subtool. So how can we transpose pose all of our subtools at the same time? Well, luckily there is a plugin for that comes pre-installed with ZBrush. It's into the Z plugin menu, and it's called TransposeMaster. Now, TransposeMaster basically takes all of your subtools, steps them down to the lowest subdivision level, and temporarily deletes subdivision levels and bakes them together into a single mesh. Then you can use polygrouping and masking to pose the character with all the subtools as one. And then when you press T-pose to subtools, it will transfer that pose data across to all the other subtools. So you'll regain your subtools with their subdivision levels, but they will now have a new pose. Now in this plugin, we have the ability to use a Z-sphere rig, and we'll talk about that later. We're not going to deal with Z-sphere rigs just yet. We have the ability to preserve existing polygroups. So if your model is broken up into polygroups, this is just a single polygroup. But if you had the head and arms polygrouped separately, you could preserve those in your transpose mesh, and that would make it easier to manipulate the model. Now we also have layers, and this means a layer will be created at the top subdivision level for each tool, and that's where the pose will be stored. So if you've watched the video on layers yet, we do have an entire chapter that talks about layers in ZBrush. They're under Tool, Layers, here. Don't confuse this with the layer menu here. This is an entirely different layer menu for 2.5D illustration, and we never use this. These are the 3D sculpting and painting layers, and you can have your pose stored here in layers so you can go back and turn it off and return to your neutral position. So if we want to start posing, I will press T-pose mesh. That takes all of my subtools, drops them down to their lowest subdivision level, and makes a T-pose mesh from them. Now, something to keep in mind here is make sure all of your subtools in your original Z tool have different names, because that can cause problems for TransposeMaster if two subtools share the same name. So now let's go ahead and repeat that process. Let's mask out the head, and we'll turn off frame mode. Invert the mask, and you see that now we have actually unmasked the teeth and the tongue separately. So let's go ahead and Control Alt click drag. Let's get that unmasked, and let's get this masked. Now when I do my transpose line, I'm moving all those subtools together. Now I can do a hinge joint like this, or perhaps I want to try and do a bone pose, which may or may not be successful because this shape curves back around the point that I'm rotating from, so it might distort. So yeah, that's going to distort. However, if I bring this back down here to the base of the neck, it's much more successful, and we get a nicer blend there. So we can bring that neck up. Let's move the transpose line so it's running straight down the axis of the head like this. And I will click and drag the center circle while I'm on rotate, and I can rotate the head. Now you notice that that gives me a little distortion down there. So one of the ways that we can fix that is we can grab this circle by clicking on it, pull it down further away, and then we can sort of affect how that transition happens there. It's still giving me a little bit of distortion, so what I will do is I'll grab this point and I'm going to drag it way off, zoom back in the head, and then if I hold down the Alt key, I get a better transition here. This is the supination tool I was telling you about. We'll use this on the forearm as well. So we can give a little bit of rotation to the neck. I'll take the Move brush, and I often, as I'm in my TransposeMaster plugin, I will do resculpting here as I go. I'll just fix areas of deformation as I'm sculpting, or as I'm posing, and that gives me less work to do later when I have to go in there and actually resculpt the posed subtools. Let's mask just the head using the lasso. Invert the mask, make sure that our subtools that we want to move, the teeth and the tongue, are unmasked. I'll draw a transpose line from the base of the skull forward, and then we can just move the head up like this. If I bring that transpose line into the center of the head, make sure it's running straight down this axis. Bring that point up. I can click the center circle, and I can kind of rotate the head. It's almost like a little dog looking at you curiously. Clear the mask. Let's arch the back. I'll mask out everything down to the waist. Control-click on the background to invert the mask, and then just Control-click to feather the edge. Draw a new transpose line, and I will position this about here. Click and drag, and I can rotate that up. Move the transpose line, click in the center circle, and I can start to rotate the hips. Now, we'll undo that. You can see what's happening is that that rotation's not quite where we want it. So let's draw this line again. From here, straight up the length of the model. Bring this to here. There we go. And I'll draw a transpose line to about the middle of the torso, hold down the Alt key, and I can rotate and sort of arch that back. I'll take my Move brush, and I just want to scooch these faces. Make sure it's the Move brush, not the standard. I just want to scooch these faces over a little bit. Like I said, just correcting as I'm posing. Turn on perspective. There we go. So let's move one of these arms out. I'll clear the mask, and I will use my transpose mask, holding down the Control key and clicking and dragging, making sure that I'm in transpose mode. R for rotate, Control, click and drag, and I'll mask down to the arm. Get that as close as I can get it. I'm going to manually mask out the rest with a lasso. Another thing that you could do here is you could mask this area if it's easy to grab a hold of, and then Control-click to invert the mask. And then I'll just go in with my paintbrush, make sure that I'm on masking, and I've got mask pen selected. Hold down Control-Alt, and I can unmask the shoulder area here. And I want to rotate this arm out. So let's unmask this, Control-click to feather the edge of that mask. I want to make sure that the pectoralis here is unmasked. Go to transpose, rotate, draw a line from here down to about the elbow, and then we can bring that over. Make sure again that we get all those faces, that you don't want to have anything stray. Drag that out. I'm going to draw my transpose line from here. I want my point of rotation to happen from there. Bring that back. Now these faces are going to stretch. That's just going to happen because what we need to do is go back in here and we'll just do a little bit of smoothing. And this pectoralis area is going to have to be resculpted. That will happen generally when you're posing as the pectoralis stretches and moves around. So I'll do my best to sort of scooch that around from here. Also, you could use a higher subdivision level for your TransposeMaster mesh. You just need to make sure that you step down to like level 2 and then delete your lower level. And that makes it a little bit easier sometimes to do some of this corrective sculpting when you're in this mode because you're not at such a low subdivision level. So let's go ahead and change these hands. I'm going to isolate the hands with a visibility marquee. I'm going to hide everything but the hand. I'm going to take my transpose line and I'm going to mask down to the pinky finger. I am going to go to mask lasso and just lasso out everything but that. And I will unmask all of this. Draw a transpose line to the base of the finger, and I want to position it so that circle is right there at the root of that joint, and then just Alt-click drag, and I can bend that joint. Draw another line to the next knuckle, Alt-click drag, I can bend that joint. Now it's gonna collapse a little bit because we have a very, very low resolution for our first subdivision level, but when you step back up your subdivision levels after you've transferred the pose, that should self-correct. But again, be prepared for your best work to involve doing some resculpting on your pose. Always. Poses have to be resculpted. It's just the nature of posing. It's the nature of anatomy. I'll mask out the ring finger here, invert that mask, and do the same. This bone posing is absolutely invaluable for fingers and toes. So we can bring this, hold down the Alt key, bring this forward. I can just grab the whole line, bring that down. And that's one of the frustrating things about transpose. It's easy to miss the circle and can be a little tricky to select it. When I teach my ZBrush classes at Gnomon, I have a document that I give my students the first class on how to use transpose because it's such an unusual tool. It can be hard for people to get a handle on it at right out of the gate. And so I always give them a little bit of extra documentation on it. I say that because don't get frustrated with this and stop using it or stop trying to learn it. Give it a little bit of practice. You'll get it pretty quickly. After following along with this video, you should be set. I, to this day, will have problems where I accidentally do that and I get rid of my line or I don't actually grab the circle and I'm accustomed to just redrawing my line. It's pretty quick when you have the confidence of familiarity. So we'll bend that joint and draw a transpose line here and bend this joint. And this last one, I am just going to mask out that fingertip and I'm going to rotate. Hold the Alt key, we'll just rotate that down. So it gives us a nice little bit of a pose in that hand. And while I'm here, I'm going to take my move brush. I'm going to turn perspective on and off just to check the shapes there. I just want to fix that a little bit. And I'm going to look at it. Looking at this, I'd like to make I would like the metacarpals, the long bones of the palm, to be longer because it's just more monstrous. I'm going to mask out this area, invert the mask, take my move transpose line, and I'm just going to take the center circle. Tell you what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to actually draw this line in the direction of those bones, position it by clicking on the center circle and moving it. I'm going to position it in the center of the metacarpals. Hold down the Shift key, click and drag the center circle, and look at that, I can stretch that area. So just stretching those metacarpals makes that hand a little bit creepier to me. So I'll Control Shift click on the background, and that reveals all of our geometry again. Now, what I like to do is, before I get too far into a pose, is to go ahead and transfer it back into my subtools and then run TransposeMaster again. Now, it's possible to save this project, So if I go to File, Save As, I can save a project, and you see that, there's my hellhound that is the subtools. Here's my TransposeMaster mesh. So it is possible for us to save this and come back to it. But I'm going to go ahead and press T-pose to subtool right here. I'll press this button, and that will transfer all those positions over very, very quickly. It's already finished. Now, if I step up my subdivision levels, I've got all of my detail right there. And you can see there's the little bit that I need to resculpt, but because I took care as I was working to sort of fix those areas as I went, it's not as much work. So I can step down, take my move brush, sort of scooch this in, smooth this back a little bit, and I can do my resculpting in these areas as required. I could do a little bit of smoothing here. I'll just turn down the Z intensity, there we go, on that brush, and smooth this back. And one nice thing about subdivision levels is if you smooth at a lower subdivision level and then step back up, it will reintroduce your detail. So it's not as destructive as you might think. So there we go. We've got a bit of posing. I like the pose on that hand. I could go in there and lengthen those fingers using the exact same technique that I did to lengthen the metacarpals. So maybe I want to change the entire position of this forearm. Instead of having the palm facing down, I want the palm facing up. So it's almost like he's asking for something or gesturing for something. That's called supination. Supination is when the long bones of the forearm, the radius and the ulna, rotate and cross over one another. So the best way to think of that is in a neutral position. This position right here is called pronation. It's where it's rotated and the palm is down. If it rotates so the palm faces up, so if you hold your hand out in front of you right now and rotate your palm down to face the ground, that's pronation. Rotate your palm up, that's supination. Andrew Koss from anatomytools.com, when I worked with him many years ago, he gave me a great mnemonic device for that. He says, think of holding a bowl of soup. Supination is holding a bowl of soup. Pronation is pouring it out. So let's do that. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to save my work. I'm just hitting the 9 hotkey, which is an autosave hotkey. I've said this in a few of these chapters. It's great to do that as you're working. I do it as I'm recording because I don't want to lose my place and have to redo the entire chapter. But don't let that be a replacement for File, Save As, or saving Z tools. It's just a nice way to execute a quick save. It's the hotkey for this button right here. So we've saved our work, and let's do another TransposeMaster pass. Now, also, you'll notice that I have the floor plane hidden right now. When we get down to the feet, I'll turn that floor plane on because I want to be able to sculpt the compression of the feet against that floor plane, and I want to make sure there's a sense of gravity and pressure there. So let's go to T-pose mesh once again. It'll make a new T-pose mesh for us, and let's do that forearm. I will mask the forearm out, invert the mask. Got a little bit of a curve in there that's not too terribly great, so I'm going to fix that just with the sculpting brushes here. There we go. Now I want to supinate this arm. I'll go to Transpose Rotate. I'll draw a transpose line starting from the, that's the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It's the little bony, pokey out point on the inside of your elbow. I'm going to drag this well out. This deformation works much, much better if the line is pretty long. Now this is tricky. Grab this circle, and I'm just going to bring it back a little bit so it's sitting behind the elbow. I'm going to grab this circle, and this is tricky. You got to wait until the circle's lit up to grab it, and I'm going to make sure that that is running the length along the axis of those long bones. Go to Transpose Rotate, hold down the Alt key, click and drag, and we can rotate. Oops, I'm rotating the wrong direction. There we go. I'm clicking and dragging from towards the left, and I am supinating this arm. See that rotating? It's twisting those faces. Now there will be some resculpting I'll have to do in this area. That's going to happen. There you see. So I might have done that a couple too many times. Let's undo those down to about there. Now I'm going to mask further forward, draw my transpose line again. Transpose posing is a little bit of massage. You know, you have to sort of work the mesh into the position you want. So let's rotate this. So I don't need quite so much length in that for this part. There we go. And I'm going to go to my move brush. And I'm going to correct the deformations. Let's clear that mask and do a little bit of sculpting here. Take my smooth brush, make sure my Z intensity is turned down. I just want to smooth these transitions a little bit. Now this area is getting a little bit twisted up and funky. I'm going to smooth that out. And I'm going to take my move brush and just correct any problem areas here. And the wrist is probably too narrow in and of itself, so I'm just going to widen these points here. And I can sculpt in here, even though there's just one subdivision level. I'll take the clay tubes brush with no alpha, turn my focal shift down, and I just want to basically save myself the trouble of, once I transpose this pose back into the subtools, that I've done a little bit of work on making sure the volumes work. And there's nothing wrong with this, nothing unusual about this. Some models will pose really perfectly, others will require some finesse like this. And it's not a big project to get in there and work these areas. So the arm's looking quite, the hand is looking quite weird. Let's isolate that and take a transpose line, end it at the elbow, or excuse me, end it at the wrist, Alt, click drag, and we can bring that hand out. Now let's fix these fingers. The fingers are obviously not in an ideal position for this pose. So clear my mask, and let's pose this finger. And again, we'll do the exact same thing we did before. We draw a transpose line, and then we will bend that finger at the root with the Alt key. Clear our mask. I can draw a transpose mask by control clicking and dragging down to this middle finger if I choose to. And you can very easily accidentally have something unmasked and then make a change to it and not know it when you're zoomed in like this. So if you're working on something like hands and feet, I highly recommend isolating them with a visibility marquee like that. That's just the control shift click drag. That's all that is. And you can press the space bar to move it around. So let's zoom out and let's redo that. So I just want to isolate that hand like so. Great, so let's go ahead and mask this out. I will use a lasso this time. Mask that, invert the mask, draw my transpose line, position my transpose line, go to rotate, Alt, click and drag. Now that's collapsed right there, you see that? So what I need to do is go to a side view here, and let's get that rotation point and move it, and see if that doesn't fix that. That's an improvement. Take my move brush, and just do a little bit of correcting on that finger. All right. And let's fix this. We'll fix both these fingers at the same time, actually, because they're well off. We'll take the transpose line, draw it here, Alt, click, drag, and then I will mask up to this joint since I'm doing two fingers at the same time. Alt, click, drag. Now you see what that did. That one went off axis. They both went off axis, so I need to come here, Alt, click, oops, unmask this area here. And I want to fix this by Alt, clicking and dragging. Take the move, smooth that back a little bit. Clear my mask, and I'll lasso the ring finger. If hellhounds wear rings, I don't know if you'd call that a ring finger on a hellhound. Well, surely they probably wear rings. I imagine hellhounds probably wear very interesting rings. There we go. And we'll draw another transpose line up to the first joint there. And this, as you see, as I get faster and faster, where I'm just speeding up the process, I can do this very quickly, and you will do this very, very quickly. It just takes a little bit of time to get a feel for the brush. And the main advice I would give is just don't become frustrated with it because it is unusual. It's unusual, but it does amazing things because it's unusual. Like a lot of things in ZBrush, they don't necessarily look like what you expect them to look like from other programs, but ZBrush has never done things based on what other programs do, and that's one of the things that makes it so remarkable and has made it so successful. And it just takes a little bit of effort to kind of get your head into the mindset of how it works, and things become much, much easier. So let's Alt, click, drag that point there. So there we go. That's going to be a lot better for that pose. I'm going to take my move brush, and I just want to adjust the pinky a little bit here, that last metacarpal. And while we're at it, let's stretch these metacarpals as well, so it's not a stumpy little hand compared to the other one. I'll go to Transpose Move, draw a transpose line, and then just Shift, click, and drag, and just stretch those out just a little bit. And then I'll reveal all again. So I think it'd be nice to spread these fingers. So I will isolate this finger, Transpose Rotate, and I'm just going to rotate from the top. I'm going to clear my mask and then mask this finger. Transpose Rotate from the top. And then I'll come over to this finger, the index finger, isolate it, and I'll Transpose Rotate this out. There we go. Yeah, that's good. Clear that. Go back to my move brush and just make sure things work in silhouette. This is a great time to use the thumbnail view to look at the silhouette. When you're posing hands, I can't stress enough how much easier it is to look at things in the silhouette to get a feel for whether or not it's working. And also just to remember the foundational mechanical structure of the hand. Like make sure that you don't have a situation like I have right here where that metacarpal is sort of taking a left-hand turn in the middle of the bone. So make sure things are following a structural integrity. There we go. Right there, we want to make sure that that finger stays somewhat straight there. So we want the relationship between the joints, between the bones, to stay consistent and correct. The fingers themselves can bend. Okay, let's reduce that thumbnail. And there we go. So we've got, let's go ahead and move this arm out as well. I will lasso this arm, invert the mask, draw a transpose line here, and then just bring that arm out. Maybe bring it down a little bit. So I'm going to move my transpose line so the point of rotation is here, and then bring that arm down. There we go. Clear my mask. Now, if I want to pose something like the tail, I would use the same bone posing technique. I would just have to work my way down the tail. Something like the tail would work really, really well with the Z-sphere posing, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So if I go to Transpose Rotate, I would bone pose along the length of the tail like this, bit by bit. It could be a bit challenging, but it's worth the effort. And of course, you'll end up with some little kinks in it that you can correct here to a degree using your move brush, and then you can further correct it in your subtool by resculpting. So maybe I don't want this forked tail to be perfectly equidistant. Let's go ahead and clear our mask. Let's mask the end of the tail. Control click on the mask to feather it. We'll draw a transpose line straight down the tail, move it into position, and rotate, alt click drag the center circle, and we can twist that tail. Ah, there you go. Watch that. It's very, very easy to accidentally miss points, so be real careful of that. There we go. We'll rotate that tail a little bit. And maybe we'll rotate the tail off the axis. Hold down the Alt key and let's bend it off to the side. I'm going to make a real strong move here just to make sure no other points are moving. It's really frustrating when you accidentally move points that you didn't mean to. It's just a pain. And it will happen. It happens to the best of us. All right, clear our mask, and there we go. Looks like he's howling at the moon. So let's go ahead and do T-pose to sub-T, and that transfers everything back over to our subtools. And there we go. Now, at this stage, I'll turn the floor plane on. And like I said, I keep a floor plane when I'm posing because I like to be able to see that the character is actually touching the ground. So it's very, very easy for things to hover. Look at that. Not actually touching the ground plane. So I'll turn off perspective. And I could probably sculpt these feet much more, but it's a sketch. We'll bring these feet, these toes down. Or alternately, we could bring the floor plane up. Oops, let's step back up. bring the floor plane up, Alt-click on it, go to our Transpose gizmo this time, turn the gizmo back on, and I'll just press F for focus, and I'll bring the gizmo, hold down the Alt key, bring the gizmo over here so I can actually see it, and then we'll zoom back into that area and just scooch that up. And I want to countersink it into the foot a little bit because I want to Alt-click on the foot. And the reason I do this is I like to take something like the inflate brush and sort of inflate against the ground plane so you can create sort of the feeling of skin compressing against the ground. That's especially nice if you do a 3D print where you include the base with the print. So it really gives you a sense of gravity and pressure. So it's kind of a nice little touch there. So there we go. Posing with TransposeMaster. It's very simple. The most challenging part is just getting a handle on the transpose line. Again, the transpose line you access by W, E, or R and turn off the gizmo. And really, that's the most challenging aspect of it, is just getting a feel for the nuances of that particular tool, because it is unusual. So something I'd like to point out before we move on is this little white circle here. This white circle will center your transpose line on whatever model you're currently selecting. So if I click that, it centers to the center of the Hellhound in space right now. If I isolate a portion of the mesh and then click that white circle, it will center to the selected portion, to the visible portion, which can be a handy tool to have. I often just manually draw my transpose line and position it, but if you want a quick recenter, that's a great way to do it. So we've seen transpose with the TransposeMaster plugin. Let's take a look at pose. So returning to our neutral posed Hellhound, I have another subtool loaded up here, and this is the Z-Sphere rig. Now, if you have not yet seen Z-Spheres in action, it may be beneficial for you to watch the video on Z-Spheres first, although we're not using this as a modeling tool, we're using this as a posing tool. Z-spheres are essentially an armature chain. Each individual sphere is a Z-sphere, and the connections between them will generate, usually it generates topology. So if I press the A key, I can preview the mesh that this makes. You can see it makes a Dynamesh mesh based on that Z-sphere chain. And if I press the D key, or press the A key again, I can exit out of that preview mode and be back into my Z-spheres. Now, if you have a model that you created using Z-spheres, you will have your Z-sphere chain already intact, and you can use that as a rig. So let's take a look at how we can actually use Z-spheres to rig our models. I'll go back to the Cave Dweller. Now, I'll step down to my lowest subdivision level. TransposeMaster will automatically do this, but I just want to take a look and see, do I want to pose this level or one level up? And judging by the topology, I think I will stay with my lowest subdivision level. One thing about Z-sphere chains is if you have a dense mesh in one of your subtools, it can be really problematic. It can slow things down considerably. So for example, these teeth here, I want to make sure that I have a low enough subdivision level for the teeth and for the tongue. And those are both going to be fine. So I don't have to be at my lowest level when I execute TransposeMaster. I could be back up at my high one for the body. And I'll click T-Pose Mesh, but this time I will turn on Z-Sphere Rig. What this does is when it creates my TransposeMaster mesh, it will put a Z-sphere in the base of it, and then it will allow me to either draw my own Z-sphere chain or paste an existing one in, because you see I've got Store and Paste TransposeMaster Rig available here. So let's go ahead and do this now. I'll press T-Pose Mesh, and it will create a new TransposeMaster mesh, but now I have a Z-sphere sitting at the core of it, and it's still just one subtool. That is my Z-sphere. If you have solo turned on, you won't see your mesh, so be aware of that. That's a little gotcha. Because I'm working with Z-spheres, I'll turn my draw size down to 1. I'll press W for move, and I'm going to take this root Z-sphere and I'm going to move it to about the middle of the figure here. Snap to a front view. And you can change your draw size if you like while you're drawing these Z-spheres, but I don't recommend doing it. I always recommend keeping it at 1, because when you're moving Z-spheres, having your draw size higher than 1 makes it very easy to accidentally. Turn on X symmetry, bring the 2 dots together, click and drag, And then if I press the Shift key, it will snap to the same size as the parent. Double-click off the model, rotate to a side, and turn solo off. And now you see we've got these two spheres in there. If I turn on frame mode, they'll be colored. Now if I change to W for move, I can bring that sphere up here. Maybe we'll put that at the shoulders. Go back to Q for draw, and I'll turn solo on again. Double-click off the spheres. I always double-click off so nothing is selected before I draw a new sphere. Draw a child sphere, and I can make this one smaller if I want to, or press the Shift key, which always snaps it to the same size as the parent. Double-click off the model, turn solo off, and then I'll go to W for move and bring this down to the base of the tail, or we'll bring this down to the base of the tail. Now I want to insert spheres for the hips and the torso. So I'll go to Q for draw, and I'll just click in between these two spheres, and that adds a sphere for the hips. And I'll draw a sphere here, and that'll add a sphere for the torso. Now, I want to treat this like a skeleton. I don't need these spheres to be so large, so I'll press E for scale, and I will click between the root sphere, which is this one, and any other sphere. Hold down the Alt key and click and drag, and that will change the size down so it's more like an armature, more like a skeleton. Now, the root sphere is this first sphere here, the one that we were given when we started. That is the only sphere that cannot be deleted. If you want to delete a sphere, go into draw mode, hold down the Alt key and click a sphere, and you'll delete it. And Control Z will undo that. And I can sort of selectively scale spheres. If I click E for scale, I can scale up the sphere for the hips, and I can move this up. I can scale up the sphere for the torso, just like so. I can go to W for move, and I can bring the shoulder sphere up and scale that up if I want to. Now, what's important to understand about Z-spheres as a rigging tool, each sphere is going to capture the vertices closest to it. So you want to capture verts by having Z-spheres there close to things like the torso or the back of the head or whatnot. And those vertices will be captured in the skinning algorithm when we use the Z-sphere chain for rigging. So I can go ahead and create the rest of my Z-sphere chain here. We're going to do this two ways. I'm going to create a real basic Z-sphere chain, and then I'm going to rig with that, and then I'm going to show you how to copy an existing Z-sphere chain and paste it in. So we'll go back to draw, Q for draw, we'll solo this, draw a new child sphere here, double-click off the model, turn off solo, W for move, and this is why I have my draw size set all the way down, so I can grab just one Z-sphere. Move this one, and I'll add spheres along the length of this, and then W for move to position these in the tail. And I'm going to go ahead and add more spheres in here. The more spheres we have, the more control we'll have over the rig, and the better the skin will be. I'm going to draw two child spheres for hips here. Double-click off the model, and I'm going to take W for move, and I'm going to move these over to where about the great trochanter will be. Draw child spheres here and bring these down to the knee. Now, with things like knees and elbows, when I'm doing a Z-sphere chain like this, I don't use a single joint. I draw two spheres like this, and I use two spheres for these joints. It just gives me a better control and keeps that joint from collapsing. Let's draw another sphere here. And then I'll take W for move and drag this down to the ankle and just make sure that we're checking from each view that these are actually in the right position. I'm going to drag this down to the heel, and I'm going to add a couple spheres there. I'm going to add one for the ankle, move this down, and I'll draw a child sphere here. I can make that pretty big. I don't need to have individual toes riggable, so we'll just bring this down to the toes, bring this out, and make sure that this is sitting inside the mesh for the feet. Now, let's do something similar for the head and neck. I'll draw a child sphere. Let's go to solo, bring the two dots together and draw a child sphere for the neck. Double-click off the model, turn off solo, and we'll just use move to bring this up to the base of the head. Go to Q for draw, and we'll insert a sphere there and bring this down for the neck. And I'm going to bring another sphere in here. I'm going to turn on solo, and I'm going to draw a sphere for the head. Double-click off the model, take W for move, move this sphere up, Now I'll draw a sphere for the back of the skull here. And I'll draw a sphere for the face. And I'll draw a child sphere for both of these. The more spheres that we have in here, like I said, the more control we'll have and the better the resulting bind will be. So I'll move this back there to that portion of the head, and I'll move this up here for the face. So I'll probably bring this forward like this, and let's turn on solo again, and I'll draw a child sphere here. Double click off the model, and I'll take move, and I'll pull this down so I'm capturing all those verts of the face there. I'll do it like that. Now I want to put some shoulders in here. I'm going to go to W for move, and let's grab this sphere that we have for our shoulders. Draw a child sphere, Q for draw. These will be our shoulder spheres, and I'll go to W for move and move them out here. Then I'm going to draw a child sphere, bring this down for the elbow. Again, remember what I said about having two spheres for elbows and knees? I just think that's a lot better. I'll draw a second sphere here. I snapped it to the same size as the parent by holding the shift key once I started drawing it. Now I'm going to go to W for move, and if I click in between two spheres, I can move the whole chain underneath it. Draw a child sphere here, and we'll bring this down with move to the wrist. Draw another child sphere here, and bring this down here. And I could do each individual finger, and you would do that the exact same way that you use these spheres to draw, to make fingers for a model. If you watch the Z-sphere chapter, you basically draw a root sphere for each finger like this, double-clicking off the model after each one. Let me turn on solo mode so I can see that a little bit more clearly. And draw a sphere here. Now I'm going to draw child spheres. Just click, drag, and press shift as you draw each one. And that just snaps those to be the same size as the parent. Turn off solo mode, and then I can just take these spheres, W for move, and we can drag these fingers out so we're actually capturing the verts of those fingers. And then we're just going to have to finesse the positioning to make sure that they actually lie within the finger geometry. So we just have to move around the model to be sure that these are actually positioned correctly. So the ring finger obviously is not in the right position. We'll bring that up. And the same for the pinky finger. We'll bring that up and just check again from a top view. If you rotate and you can't find your model again, you can always press F for focus. And position this, and position this. Bring this forward. And then we're just going to draw child spheres here for the knuckles. And I want one for the thumb, so I'm going to insert a sphere here, and I'm going to draw a new child sphere here. Double-click off the model and draw another child sphere, and then we can take move, W for move, and just bring that down to the thumb so it's sitting in the correct position. And I'll insert a child sphere along the length of it and use move to move that into position. And if I wanted to add another joint for the wrist, I could do that, but this should be good. So this is a good test case. So we've built our skeleton. Now we want to see the rig in action. So what I will do is I will go down to the bottom of my tool list, and I've got rigging. And we have the option to bind mesh. So if I turn on bind mesh, we now have our mesh bound to our Z-sphere chain. So if I go to rotate, turn off X symmetry, let's rotate the arm. So you see that arm rotates. Let's rotate the waist. We can bring the waist up. We can click here, and we can rotate the neck by clicking in between those joints. Let's rotate this arm out. And you see that we're getting a pretty good skin. Now this area here is not working so great, so I'm going to undo. And it's important to sort of test your bind early on so you can spot things like that. I'm going to turn off bind mesh, and I'm going to go back into my chest sphere here, and I'm going to draw a child sphere because I want to make sure that the vertices of the chest have something that they're bound to. And I'll take the move, W for move, and pull that forward. And that should hopefully capture those vertices. Maybe we want to capture the rib cage as well. So I'll put a new child sphere here, and I'll draw child spheres off of that. W for move, and let's bring these out almost like ribs just to capture that rib cage, just to make sure that there are Z spheres here to capture all those vertices, that they're not going to get assigned to the arms instead. Now I had my X symmetry turned off, didn't mean to, so I'm going to have to undo those, and I'll have to redo those with X symmetry turned on. So be careful of that. So Q for draw, and we'll draw child spheres, draw another child sphere, bring this up and out, just to make sure that we're capturing those ribs. There we go. Now we'll try bind to mesh again, rotate. We could leave X symmetry turned on. We can rotate both arms at the same time, turn X symmetry off, rotate one arm out. You see that captures those vertices in the chest much nicer now. We can bend the waist, bring a leg back, bend that knee. See that knee bends much, much nicer with those two joints. We can bend the ankle, a lot more flexibility in the ankle there. We can actually bend the tail with quite a bit of flexibility here. We can give it a reverse curve back on itself, like so. And grab the base of the tail here, raise that up. If I hold down the Alt key, I can rotate it like this. So that's why I'm rotating that Z-sphere chain. Come up here to the head. Oops, be careful of that. Make sure that I've got this selected. There we go. If I click on that Z-sphere, I can rotate the head like that. If I click in between, I can rotate like this. Oops, there we go. And notice that those Z-spheres that I have inside the head are capturing those vertices inside the bind, so I don't run into a situation now where I end up having the head deforming as I'm moving it. There's enough geometry there to actually, or there's enough Z-spheres there to capture that. So now if I select this sphere here at the base of the skull and click and drag, I can rotate the head. So we'll position everybody. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of positioning in the hands here. You may find this to be much, much easier than the posing that you were getting using TransposeMaster with the Transpose line. So it's entirely up to you. I think both tools are very, very powerful to understand how to use, and I use them both for different things on different occasions. Let's go ahead and bring the shoulder back. Watch this. If I grab this joint here, I can bring that whole shoulder back as if it is an actual shoulder girdle. And I can bring this shoulder forward as well, and the whole scapular region comes with it. So this is really nice for getting more accurate posing and anatomical deformation. So when we're happy with our pose, let me go ahead and rotate this sphere. Now be really careful that you don't twist something through 180 degrees. I just want to double check that tail and make sure that that's not twisting the wrong way. When we're happy with our pose, what we do is we go back to T-pose to sub-T, and it will transfer all that data over. There you see it's transferred and complete. Turn off frame mode, and there we go. Now, what if we already have a Z-sphere chain? That Z-sphere chain, for example, if I made this character using Z-spheres, I would already have a Z-sphere rig that I used to generate the model in the first place. So how can we utilize this? Well, it's quite simple. I will go ahead and reload our default position for the character, and we will revisit this using a Z-sphere rig that is already in existence. So here we are back at our first step where we have executed T-pose mesh with Z-sphere rig enabled, and it's placed a Z-sphere here in the root. If I go to this Z tool over here, Z-Sphere rig, and I go to Store TransposeMaster rig, then go back to our T-pose mesh. There we go. And then click Paste TransposeMaster rig. It will paste that Z-Sphere chain in. So we can save ourselves quite a bit of time by pasting in a rig. You can also create a Z-Sphere rig for a biped and then save that. And then you can always have that as something that you can paste into your models as you need them. Then I'll just take my move, make sure X symmetry is turned on. There we go, make sure X symmetry is turned on, and we can then position the spheres so they fit better. We can always go in and add spheres with Q for draw. You can insert spheres as needed and edit it just like we did on the previous tutorial. And once again, you would turn on rigging, bind mesh to see the results of your bind like this. And then you would execute the pose by clicking T-pose to sub-T. And once you do that, it will copy the pose back across. This time I'll turn on layer. And let's go ahead and just do a real quick change to some of this. Let's move the head, and I'll show you what happens here. Let's move the body, move the leg, move this leg. And then we will T-pose to sub-T. That transfers all that pose data over for each subtool. But what's different this time, because we had layer turned on, is we will have a 3D layer for each subtool. So when it gives us the OK here in a moment, it tells us that it's transferred the pose data. There we go. Now, if I go to the tool menu and open up the layer menu, the highest subdivision level of each subtool is going to have a layer on it. Now, if you need to understand more about layers, make sure you watch the video on layers, because there's things that you need to understand. For example, if we have a layer, I cannot sculpt or paint on the model now unless if we have a layer, I cannot sculpt or paint on the model now unless I have a layer in record mode. So it will give me an error message like this if I try and sculpt or paint. But what's nice here is if I turn off visibility on that layer, I get my neutral position back. So that can be really, really helpful. And that's true for all the subtools. So if I come down here to this subtool and turn the layer off, I get my neutral position back for the teeth and for the tongue. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's just accessed by turning on layer in the TransposeMaster menu. So that completes this look at posing and using TransposeMaster. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the gizmo, we've talked about transpose, and we've talked about posing using both transpose line on its own with TransposeMaster and using Z-spheres as a rigging tool. So I hope you have enough information and confidence to go forward and explore these tools on your own. They are some of the most powerful ones in ZBrush, especially being able to transpose pose with a Z-sphere rig. So it's going to require a little bit of investment of time to understand if you've never used Z-spheres before, but you have all the videos here to walk you through it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.